So I want you to just take a second and imagine waking up one morning, pouring your coffee and looking out your kitchen window. And the trees you've lived next to for decades, they're just gone, cleared overnight.
Yeah, and we aren't talking about like a modest landscaping project down the street. We're talking about heavy, massive, industrial, earth-moving machinery just rolling in before dawn.
Right, exactly. The kind of equipment that shakes the bedrock so hard, it literally rattles the coffee mugs in your cabinets.
Oh, totally.
So naturally, you're furious, right?
Yeah.
You march down to your local city council because you want answers.
Yeah.
But the politicians that you literally elected, they look you in the eye and tell you they can't say a single word.
Because they're bound by strict legal secrecy.
Yes. They literally cannot tell you what is being built in your own backyard.
Which, I mean, it sounds like the opening 10 minutes of some sci-fi dystopia. Like you expect a massive spaceship to just uncloak over the town.
I know, right? But the thing is, it's not a movie. It is happening right now, like this very morning, in all 50 states. And the driving force behind this massive, totally covert land grab, it's artificial intelligence.
And that right there is the core of our deep dive today. We are looking at this incredibly fascinating, really wide-ranging interview between journalist Katie Couric and environmental advocate Erin Brockovich.
Yeah, and they are really shedding light on this stealthy, incredibly rapid rollout of massive AI data centers across the U.S.
Which is just wild. We're pulling directly from excerpts of this exclusive interview today to really bring you the full picture.
Yeah.
And we are looking at this from all sides, completely impartially.
Right, because we've got the environmental and community impacts happening on the ground, but then we're also going to look at the really firm pushback from tech CEOs and the massive geopolitical arguments driving this whole AI arms race.
Yeah, because there are just colossal forces colliding here. I mean, you have global technological dominance crashing straight into like local municipal zoning laws.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So listen, whether you live in a rural farming community where your family has worked the dirt for generations or, you're in a bustling suburb, this deep dive is going to totally change how you see the world around you.
Absolutely.
It's going to alter how you look at that empty lot on the edge of town, the water flowing from your tap, and without a doubt, the bottom line of your electric bill.
Oh, for sure. And to really understand how an infrastructure project of this absolute magnitude gets rolled out nationwide without triggering massive public alarm, well, we have to start where Brockovich started her investigation.
What's wild to me is that she wasn't even looking for this. I mean, Brockovich is famous for water contamination, right?
Yeah.
Like forever chemicals, industrial runoff.
Right, the classic Hinckley case.
Exactly. But one morning, she just wakes up, checks her phone, and she has like 30 or 40 emails sitting in her inbox, all submitted overnight.
Yeah, and they are all from residents in a single town, I think somewhere on the East Coast, likely in Pennsylvania.
And these neighbors, they didn't even coordinate this.
No, not at all. They were all independently experiencing this exact same sudden, totally unexplained destruction of their local environment.
Right, and they were just frantically reaching out to the one person they thought could actually help.
And then, literally within days, a nearly identical wave of complaints hits her inbox, but this time from Texas.
Which, tells an investigator like Brockovich that this isn't just some isolated municipal zoning dispute.
Exactly. It's a systemic pattern. So she decides to launch a self-reporting map on her website, BrockovichDataCenters.com, just to see, how far this really goes.
And the response was just absolute chaos. The sheer volume of traffic crashed her website twice on the very first day.
Which is insane for an environmental reporting tool.
Seriously. And by day 3, she was getting submissions from all 50 states. And right now, as we're looking at this, that database is pushing close to 16,000 individual reports.
16,000 different communities experiencing the exact same phenomenon. And the unifying characteristic in almost every single one of those reports, it's a total blackout of information.
Total secrecy. Like, city councils are literally signing non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs.
Right.
When these massive tech companies first approach a town, they use this incredibly vague terminology. They don't say massive server farm. They pitch the project as like a warehouse or a storage facility.
Yeah, and if the town is required by law to hold a public forum about the zoning, they schedule it for like 9:00 a.m. or 3:00 p.m. on a Tuesday.
Deliberately chosen hours.
Oh, absolutely. That is exactly when the vast majority of working-age residents are, on the clock at work or they're sitting in the pickup line at their local elementary school.
Right. And if you somehow manage to take the day off work and actually get to the microphone at City Hall, they give you exactly 30 seconds to speak.
It's wild.
But okay, let's unpack this for a second because I have to ask the obvious question here. Why on earth would an elected city council agree to a corporate NDA in the first place? Like, are they just blinded by seeing dollar signs for the local tax base, or are they being totally outgunned by these Silicon Valley lawyers?
Well, it is largely the latter, but combined with a very specific, highly deliberate strategy by the tech companies, they are actively exploiting the structure of American zoning laws.
Okay, how so?
So by targeting the hyper-local level like a municipal city council or a really small county zoning board, these tech companies completely bypass federal and state scrutiny.
I see. Because if, like, Google or Meta went straight to the federal government and said, hey, we want to clear-cut 4,000 acres in Pennsylvania, that would immediately trigger the National Environmental Policy Act.
Exactly. It would mandate years of intense environmental impact studies, statewide media coverage, congressional debate, the whole 9 yards.
Right.
But municipal zoning boards don't have those federal triggers. They exist to handle permits for, like, local strip malls and residential subdivisions.
So suddenly a team of 20 corporate lawyers in custom suits descends on a part-time city council in rural Texas.
Yeah, and these are council members who usually meet once a month in a middle school gymnasium.
Right.
And the lawyers pitch the NDA as just a standard business practice.
They just brush it off as normal paperwork.
Right. They argue the NDA is absolutely necessary to protect, quote-unquote, trade secrets in this highly competitive AI race.
Because God forbid Microsoft knows what Amazon is doing.
Exactly. They claim that if their competitors find out where they are building, it ruins their strategic advantage. But the practical, on-the-ground result is that these NDAs legally bind the residents' elected representatives from warning their own constituents.
Which is just, I mean, it's like your homeowners association signing a secret deal to build a massive commercial theme park in the vacant lot right next to your house, and you only find out when the bulldozers actually crush your fence.
That is a perfect analogy. The politicians who are literally elected to protect the town are legally gagged from discussing any of the collateral costs until the earth movers are already ripping up the topsoil.
Which means the public only finds out when the physical reality of the construction becomes, well, impossible to hide anymore.
And that physical reality is the second massive shock in this whole investigation.
Yeah.
Because we really have to completely throw out our mental image of what a data center actually is.
Right, because I know when most people hear data center, they picture like a nondescript office building in a suburban corporate park. Maybe a room full of server racks with some blinking blue lights, roughly the size of a grocery store.
Yeah, but that was 20 years ago. The AI supercenters being built today are these sprawling, massive industrial mega facilities.
Like how big are we talking?
They range from 22 acres up to a staggering 4,000 acres.
4,000 acres. Wait, to put that in perspective, 4,000 acres is larger than the entire physical footprint of many small American towns.
It's massive.
Yeah.
And because land is obviously cheaper outside the major cities, they're being dropped right into rural agricultural areas or the quiet edges of residential suburbs.
And they're building them right up against property lines, schools, and hospitals with absolutely no buffer zones.
None.
Which really brings us to the first massive physical casualty of this whole AI boom. Because of the sheer scale of these operations, they demand a volume of resources that frankly just boggles the mind. So let's talk about the water.
Yes. The water consumption is where the scale of these facilities truly becomes terrifying for local communities.
Because the interview really breaks down the math on this. So a traditional data center, the kind that just processes your standard internet searches or streams your movies, that uses about 500,000 gallons of water a day, which honestly is already a lot.
It is a massive amount of water.
But these new AI supercenters, the source notes, they are pulling between 1 million and 5 million gallons of water every single day. And some are even clocking in at 7 million gallons a day.
And to understand why that number is so aggressively high, we really have to look at the engineering here. We have to look at the actual thermodynamics of artificial intelligence.
Right, because an AI server isn't just a basic hard drive storing your old family photos.
Not at all. Training an AI model requires millions of these highly specialized computer processors known as GPUs. And they are running incredibly complex high-speed calculations 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
And from a physics standpoint, a processor operating at that intense capacity is essentially a highly efficient space heater. It generates a massive amount of thermal energy.
Oh, extreme heat. And if you don't remove that heat, the server literally melts itself into slag within minutes. It destroys itself.
Wow.
Exactly. And you cannot cool a 4,000-acre facility of running AI processors with simple standard air conditioning. Air just does not transfer heat fast enough to keep up.
So they have to use liquid cooling.
Right. They pipe heavily chilled water directly into the server racks. The water absorbs the immense heat from the processors, carries it away, and takes it out to these massive industrial cooling towers outside the building.
Where a massive amount of that water simply evaporates into the atmosphere to release the heat. It's just gone. It's consumed.
Millions of gallons daily just vanishing as steam. And when you look at the macro projections across the country, the math is just staggering.
Yeah, let's walk through that.
So if you take the projected 1,200 super data centers that are planned for the United States, and you assume an average of 5 million gallons of water a day for each, and multiply that across a 365-day calendar year.
You are looking at 2.2 to 2.7 trillion gallons of water consumed annually. Trillion, with a T.
It's almost unfathomable. And the geography of this rollout makes it even worse. The source material references this really in-depth analysis by The Guardian, which found that 2/3 of these planned U.S. data centers are being constructed in areas that are already classified as drought-stricken.
Wait, really? 2/3?
Yes.
So we are dropping literally the most water-intensive infrastructure in the history of modern technology directly into regions that are actively rationing water.
Exactly. Which has triggered what farmers on the ground are now calling the water grab.
Right. Because tech companies are approaching these rural farmers with massive cash offers for their land. But when you look at the fine print, it reveals they are specifically targeting the underlying water rights.
The tech giants aren't just buying the dirt. They are buying the aquifers underneath the dirt.
Which is terrifying.
It really is. They are transferring the control of the local water table away from agriculture, which, produces our actual food supply, and handing it over to a multinational corporation just to cool their servers.
But the threat isn't just about how much water they are taking out of the ground, right?
Yeah.
It is also about what they are doing to the municipal water systems that remain.
Yeah, because just the act of building a 4,000-acre facility involves massive, violent earth moving.
Right. The sheer physics of the construction phase is devastating local hydrology. Like when you bring in industrial drills and heavy excavators to flatten thousands of acres and pour foundations, you generate intense seismic vibrations. You are literally shaking the bedrock.
And the people submitting those 16,000 reports to Brockovich, they are seeing the results of this in real time.
Yeah, rural residents who rely on private wells are turning on their kitchen taps and watching their water pressure just plummet to a trickle.
Or worse, the water that does come out is thick, orange, yellow, and brown.
Ugh, turbid water.
Exactly. The subterranean aquifers have been so violently churned up by the heavy machinery vibrating above, it's completely choking the local drinking water with mud and sediment.
That is disgusting. And then once the construction finally stops and the data center actually turns on, a whole new threat to the water system emerges. The source mentions this highly alarming incident in Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Yeah, this perfectly illustrates the total fragility of municipal infrastructure when it's suddenly forced to interact with industrial tech facilities.
What exactly happened there?
Well, the liquid cooling loops we discussed earlier, they aren't just pumping pure, clean spring water. To prevent mold, algae, and mineral scale from building up inside the server pipes, the water is laced with heavy industrial chemicals and biocides.
Okay, but it's a closed-loop system, right? So it's
Right.
never supposed to touch the outside world.
Supposed to. That's the key phrase. But in Cheyenne, a failure occurred. Chemicals from one of these closed cooling systems breached, and they were discharged directly into the local wastewater and sewer system.
Which, I mean, maybe that doesn't sound world-ending to some people until you realize how a municipal sewer system actually works.
Right, because city wastewater isn't treated just by running it through a giant coffee filter. It's treated biologically.
Yes.
Cities rely on highly specific, really delicate balances of good bacteria to break down human waste. So when a data center accidentally flushes industrial algicides and biocides into the sewer, those chemicals do exactly what they were formulated to do. They kill bacteria.
Oh, wow. So they completely wipe out the biological processors in the city's treatment plant.
Exactly. Which forces the town to move incredibly fast. They have to divert the water, shut down vital systems, and try to prevent a massive systemic contamination event.
And when a municipal water system has to shut down suddenly to flush out toxins, you risk introducing air into the main pipes, which can lead to pipe bursts, loss of pressure, and entirely new bacterial outbreaks.
The margins for error are just razor thin, and these small towns simply do not have the infrastructure or the budget to handle industrial chemical spills.
Wait, hold on. I want to play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
We really have to look at the tech industry's response to this, since the source material brings in their perspective, too.
Fair enough.
Because Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, has completely dismissed these water usage concerns. I mean, he is on the record calling the alarmism, quote, fake, completely untrue, and totally insane.
Right.
Plus, there was a piece in The Atlantic that argued we simply don't have enough empirical concrete data yet to actually prove that AI is wasting water at this scale. So how do we square that? Are the tech companies just looking at future efficiency models, or are they deliberately ignoring the farmers whose wells are running dry right now?
Well, what's fascinating here is that this is a classic conflict between macro-level industry forecasting and micro-level lived reality.
Right.
The tech CEOs like Sam Altman are heavily focused on the future. They are betting billions on next-generation cooling technologies. They truly believe that in 5 or 10 years, AI systems will be incredibly energy and water efficient.
But the farmer in Texas isn't living in a future efficiency model.
Precisely. They're living in the present, where their well is currently pumping brown mud. And the argument from The Atlantic that there isn't enough concrete data that actually highlights the core problem with those NDAs we discussed earlier.
Because the NDAs legally hide the data.
Exactly. Because the tech companies bypass federal environmental studies and force local councils to sign secrecy agreements, independent scientists and municipal engineers are denied the baseline data.
This makes total sense.
The tech companies refuse to release their real-time water consumption metrics, claiming it's a competitive trade secret. Then, when the public complains about dry wells, the tech industry turns around and says, well, you don't have the data to prove it's us.
It's a perfect catch-22. They literally create a data vacuum and then use that exact vacuum to invalidate the lived experiences of the community.
It's incredibly effective. But while the tech industry can try to debate the exact gallons of water being consumed underground, there is another massive resource drain that absolutely cannot be hidden.
Because it is literally arriving in the mailboxes of local residents every single month.
Yes, the power grid.
Right. Because the thermodynamics of artificial intelligence don't just require water. Pumping millions of gallons of liquid and running massive refrigeration chillers to cool millions of processors, that requires a staggering, continuous draw of raw electrical power.
And they are plugging these 4,000-acre behemoths into a United States power infrastructure that the source explicitly describes as antiquated.
Antiquated is almost an understatement. We are talking about electrical grid architectures in some rural regions that are fundamentally based on 150-year-old designs.
Right. The grid was built to slowly scale alongside, predictable residential and commercial growth. It was never, ever designed to handle a sudden, localized power draw equivalent to a medium-sized city just appearing overnight in a rural county.
And to even get enough electricity from the power plant to the data center doors, these companies are forcing the construction of massive, above-ground electromagnetic field, or EMF, wire systems.
Yeah, these are not your average telephone poles.
No. They are routing these huge high-voltage transmission lines straight through established residential communities and farmland.
And the reason they have to be built above ground is pure physics. Pushing that much electrical current generates intense heat along the wires themselves.
Really, just the wires.
Oh, yeah. If you try to bury a transmission line carrying a gigawatt of power, the ambient heat can literally bake and melt the surrounding soil. They have to be strung up on massive metal towers just to let the open air cool them down.
That's crazy. But, the physical eyesore of the power lines is nothing compared to the economic shockwave that is hitting the consumers.
Oh, the economics are brutal.
Because upgrading the local grid to handle an AI supercenter requires building new electrical substations, new transmission lines, and basically forcing regional power plants to massively increase their baseline generation. And all of that costs billions of dollars.
And here is where the mechanical reality of American public utility regulation really comes into play. The tech corporation builds the facility for immense private profit. but they do not pay the capital cost required to upgrade the public grid to support them.
They pass the buck.
Exactly.
The source highlights this deeply concerning example of a resident in Texas. And Texas currently has one of the highest concentrations of new data centers being built.
Right.
So this resident submitted a report showing that their standard monthly utility bill of $75 suddenly skyrocketed to $420 jump.
A $400 jump.
And it came with an official warning from the local utility board to expect a permanent 75% increase in base electrical rates.
It is the socialization of corporate infrastructure costs. And it is happening on a massive regional scale.
Yeah, the New York Times report mentioned in the interview perfectly illustrates just how massive. They looked at an electricity auction held by PJM.
And for those who don't know, PJM is the nation's largest electrical grid operator. They manage the power for roughly 67 million people, covering a massive territory from Virginia Beach all the way over to Chicago.
Right. So to understand this, you really have to understand what a capacity auction is.
Yeah, could you break that down?
Sure. So grid operators like PJM, they have to guarantee that there will be enough power plants available to meet peak demand 3 years into the future. They can't just wing it.
Right, they need a buffer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they hold an auction, basically paying power generators just to exist and be ready to turn on when needed. It's like paying for standby power.
Okay, I follow.
And because these new AI data centers are projected to draw so much continuous, massive power, PJM had to secure a vast amount of new capacity in their latest auction.
And the result of that?
It is going to add $6.3 billion in costs to the monthly bills of millions of everyday households and small businesses over the next 3 years.
$6.3 billion. Driven explicitly by the new power demands of AI data centers, but placed squarely on the shoulders of everyday ratepayers.
Oh. I think grid economics can feel really abstract, so here's where it gets really interesting. Let's ground this with an analogy.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine a massive, multi-billion-dollar corporation decides to rent a single studio apartment in your residential building.
Okay.
They bring in 1,000 industrial-grade space heaters, plug them into the communal hallway outlets, and turn them on full blast 24/7.
And those heaters, obviously, immediately start tripping the circuit breakers for the entire building.
Right. So the landlord has to hire electricians, tear open the walls, and completely rewire the entire apartment complex just to handle the massive electrical draw of this one corporate tenant.
Right.
But when the landlord gets the $1 million bill for the rewiring project, they don't hand it to the corporation.
No, because the utility regulatory framework just doesn't work that way.
Instead, the landlord takes that $1 million bill and splits it equally among all the regular tenants. You didn't plug in a single space heater, but suddenly your rent goes up by $300 a month to subsidize the wiring for the guy who did.
That is an incredibly accurate translation of how public utility commissions actually operate. A utility company has a strict legal mandate to provide reliable power.
Right.
So if a massive new draw appears, they have no choice but to build capacity. They then petition the state regulators for a rate hike across the entire customer base to cover the capital expenditure of those upgrades.
It's so frustrating.
It is. The tech giant pays for the actual electricity they consume minute by minute, sure. But the multi-billion-dollar capital cost of expanding the grid to accommodate them, that is completely socialized.
Which forces incredibly cruel economic realities onto the community. I mean, when you add billions in infrastructure costs to the public rate base, fixed income citizens like retirees living on Social Security or working class families, they are literally forced to choose between buying groceries and paying their electric bill just to keep their lights on.
It's devastating. So the community is bleeding water, and they are bleeding money. But the daily reality of physically living next to one of these facilities is even more visceral. We really have to look at the immediate degradation of the local quality of life.
Which brings us right back to the thermodynamics, the intense heat generated by those millions of servers. Because even with millions of gallons of liquid cooling, these facilities still require banks of massive industrial cooling fans to push the residual hot air out of the buildings.
And that generates profound, relentless noise pollution. We are not talking about, the gentle white noise hum of a kitchen refrigerator.
Not at all. The residents are reporting a relentless, maddening drone. It runs all day and all night, 365 days a year.
And the physics of the sound makes it basically impossible to escape. High-pitched noises dissipate relatively quickly in the open air, but these industrial fans generate low-frequency sound waves.
And low frequency is completely different.
Oh, entirely. Low-frequency acoustics are incredibly insidious. The long wavelengths allow the sound to easily penetrate physical barriers. It travels straight through dense forests, through the walls of residential homes, and even through double-pane glass.
That's horrifying.
And it can travel outward for 3 to 4 miles from the facility.
In the interview, Brockovich describes it so beautifully and horribly as an itch you can never scratch. And it's completely altering the local ecosystem, too.
Yeah, the environmental reports on the animal life are startling. Beyond the animals physically displaced by the initial clear-cutting of the trees, residents are noting a complete absence of local wildlife within that 3 to 4 mile acoustic radius.
Like, just gone.
Birds, deer, entirely gone.
Wow. And it's hitting local agriculture, too. Farmers are actually reporting that cattle grazing in the vicinity of these constant low-frequency hums are experiencing noticeably fewer live births.
Which is a massive economic hit to the farmers on top of everything else. But the human toll is where the reports become truly desperate.
Yeah.
Residents trapped within the acoustic zone are reporting this terrifying cluster of symptoms: severe dizziness, sudden and unexplained headaches, pervasive nausea, and crippling chronic fatigue.
Okay, I have to push back here for a second because this is where the public debate gets really heated.
Sure, go ahead.
Are these symptoms, like the nausea, the dizziness, are they a direct biological result of the physical environment? Like, is it the low-frequency sound waves physically messing with their bodies, or the massive EMF power lines? Or are we looking at a profound, community-wide psychosomatic response to extreme stress?
That's a really valid question.
Because these people are dealing with the intense grief of losing their town's quiet character. They have intense anger at their elected officials and severe sleep deprivation from a noise that literally never stops. So, are they physically sick from the tech or physically sick from the stress?
It is a critical distinction to make, but occupational health science tells us it is almost certainly a direct biological response to the physical environment.
Wait, really? How so?
It comes down to how the human ear processes low-frequency, continuous sound. Prolonged exposure to industrial infrasound physically vibrates the inner ear, specifically the vestibular system, which is the part of your inner ear that controls your sense of balance and spatial orientation. When your vestibular system is constantly stimulated by an invisible vibration, your brain receives conflicting spatial signals.
Oh, like motion sickness.
Exactly like motion sickness. That is the actual biological mechanism causing the pervasive nausea and dizziness.
That is wild.
And it gets worse. Furthermore, continuous low-frequency noise triggers a perpetual biological stress response. Your body perceives the hum as a constant underlying physical threat, which chronically elevates cortisol levels and spikes your blood pressure.
So even if they manage to fall asleep, their nervous system is still trapped in a state of fight or flight.
Yes. The chronic fatigue and headaches are the direct result of a nervous system that is never allowed to rest. The suffering of these residents is a direct physiological consequence of the unmitigated operation of the data center's cooling systems.
And as if the invisible threats to their health weren't enough, there is a very visible, highly dangerous physical threat looming over these communities too. Fire.
Right. When you combine massive electrical currents, astronomical heat generation, and dry rural environments, the fire metrics are genuinely alarming.
The source notes that one single facility on the East Coast has logged 84 separate fire department calls.
84 incidents requiring a full emergency response.
That is insane for one building.
But it makes sense structurally because these servers are running at the absolute thermal limit, pushing unprecedented electrical current. Any tiny failure, like a frayed wire, a faulty connection, a minor arc fault, it poses an extreme risk.
Yeah, and remember the geography we discussed earlier. The Guardian found that 2/3 of these centers are in drought-stricken areas.
Right.
You are literally placing a highly combustible, massive heat source right in the middle of dry, rural brush. A small electrical fire inside a server room, if it's not contained perfectly, could instantly become a catastrophic wildfire for the surrounding farms and neighborhoods.
Which makes the secrecy surrounding these facilities so much more dangerous. If the local volunteer fire department doesn't even know what industrial chemicals are being used in the cooling loops because of a corporate NDA, how can they safely fight a fire there?
They often can't, which is exactly why the source material explicitly highlights the immense courage of the few whistleblowers who are stepping forward. When external, independent monitoring by the city is blocked by lawyers, Internal transparency is the only safeguard left.
It really is.
The interview actually mentions an inside worker at one of these new facilities who was fired for bringing up safety and testing concerns to management.
That detail is incredibly telling. The fact that an employee felt compelled to blow the whistle on safety protocols and faced immediate termination for doing so strongly indicates that the rush to get these AI centers online is actively compromising internal safety cultures.
Speed is being prioritized over structural integrity. So let's zoom out for a second. We have a mountain of localized harm stacking up here. We have depleted water tables, skyrocketing local electric bills, continuous noise pollution causing actual vestibular illness, and massive fire risks. Why on earth are national politicians and the titans of Silicon Valley pushing so incredibly hard and moving so fast to build these?
The justification from the tech industry and their aligned policymakers is almost entirely based on geopolitics and national security. They argue with intense urgency that we are in a definitive winner-take-all AI arms race.
And the primary competitor in that race is obviously China.
Yes. The source notes a specific recent development that deeply terrified Silicon Valley. A Chinese AI startup called Moonshot recently unveiled a new model known as Comm K3.
Right.
And early reports indicate that this Chinese model is rapidly approaching the performance and reasoning levels of the leading American systems.
But the kicker is that Comm K3 is allegedly operating at a fraction of the computational cost.
Exactly. So the argument from American tech leaders is that artificial intelligence is the foundational technology of the 21st century.
Like the space race.
Basically, they believe it will determine military strategy, economic efficiency, and global cyber dominance. They argue that the United States must go full speed ahead, clearing away any domestic red tape or pesky local zoning obstacles to maintain superiority.
They're saying if we slow down to conduct environmental impact studies, China wins, and we fall behind permanently.
That's the argument. It's the ultimate political trump card. They are framing data centers as critical national security infrastructure.
But Brockovich offers a very sharp, really grounded counter-argument to this whole geopolitical panic.
Right. She doesn't deny the power of AI, but she completely separates the software from the physical infrastructure.
Right. Her stance is that artificial intelligence is undeniably a revolutionary tool. But it does not have to inherently destroy our natural resources to exist. The crisis isn't the code. The crisis is that the massive corporations building the physical server farms simply refuse to cooperate with local communities to find sustainable methods.
They are choosing the cheapest, fastest path, regardless of the collateral damage to the towns.
And there's a brilliant piece of irony buried in the interview that perfectly encapsulates her point. This might actually be my favorite part of the whole source material.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Brockovich actually logged onto an AI program herself.
Oh.
And she asked the machine a direct question. If you had to redesign the entire data center network for the United States, where would you place them?
And the AI's response was entirely logical and completely at odds with how the tech industry is actually behaving.
The AI responded with one foundational rule: zero conflict with human resources.
It's incredible. The machine intelligence itself recognized that competing with human populations for vital resources like drinking water and habitable land is a fundamentally flawed deployment strategy.
It's a remarkable anecdote because it highlights the profound disconnect between the pure logic of the technology and the hyper-capitalist greed driving its physical rollout.
And that aggressive top-down deployment strategy has triggered something genuinely unprecedented in modern American politics. We are seeing a massive, highly organized grassroots backlash.
The mobilization on the ground is incredible. According to the interview data, around 300 municipalities across the country have already fought back and successfully implemented moratoriums or outright bans on new data center construction.
300. And the localized victories are piling up fast. Look at Utah. A tech company proposed a massive mega facility there. The grassroots pressure from the residents was so intense that they forced the company to scale back its blueprints by a staggering 75%.
And they didn't even stop there. The citizens were so furious at the secrecy that they organized and completely ousted the city council members who had initially tried to push the NDA through.
The exact same thing happened in Festus, Missouri. The residents essentially fired their entire local government over this issue.
And the pressure is moving up the political ladder, too. At the state level, New York Governor Kathy Hochul recognized the massive drain on the state's power grid and water tables and actually instituted a ban on new data centers to protect those resources.
And now it's hitting Washington. Federal lawmakers, specifically Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, have drafted and introduced a bill to implement a nationwide pause.
A full pause.
Yes. They want to legally halt all new AI data center construction until robust federal environmental safeguards and transparency mechanisms are established.
Which brings us to perhaps the most sociologically fascinating aspect of this entire phenomenon. Because if you just hear the name Sanders and AOC, you might think this is exclusively a left-wing environmental crusade.
But it's not. The source cites a recent Gallup poll showing that 7 in 10 Americans, 70% of the total public, oppose these centers being built near their communities.
Wow. That level of agreement is almost unheard of today.
Yeah.
This is not some fringe movement.
No, it is fiercely bipartisan. In fact, some of the most aggressive protests against these tech conglomerates are being actively organized by highly conservative right-wing groups.
Yeah, the interview specifically highlights a nonprofit called Humans First. It's led by Amy Creamer, who is a very prominent former leader of the Tea Party movement. She is literally traveling the country, organizing hundreds of protests against data centers.
Which creates a fascinating political dynamic. At the top of the ticket, the Trump administration and national Republican figures have historically aligned very closely with tech industries and billionaires, pushing for rapid deregulation to speed up construction.
But on the ground, in deep red conservative strongholds like rural Texas, local grassroots Republicans are linking arms with progressive environmentalists to fiercely fight against these corporate centers.
In political science, we often talk about the horseshoe theory. It's the concept that the extreme ends of the political spectrum, as they move further from the center, eventually curve around and meet each other.
So how does that apply here?
We are witnessing a rare, issue-specific unification of core values. On one side of the horseshoe, you have progressive environmentalists who are deeply concerned about ecological preservation, climate impact, and stopping unchecked corporate greed.
And on the other side,
You have right-wing populist conservatives who are fiercely protective of local property rights, individual sovereignty, and they are violently opposed to top-down mandates from the federal government or multinational corporations.
I want to make an analogy here because
Yeah.
this political dynamic is just wild. It's like two rival sports teams,
Right.
let's say the Red Sox and the Yankees, who have absolutely hated each other for a century. They are in the middle of a massive, ugly brawl on the field.
Okay.
But suddenly, they both realize that the billionaire owner of the stadium has quietly brought in bulldozers to pave over the baseball diamond to build a parking lot.
Right. The hatred for the rival team evaporates because the existential threat to the game itself is so much larger. They stop fighting each other, pick up their bats, and turn on the owner.
Exactly. The hypercapitalist stealthy rollout of this infrastructure has successfully united the far left and the far right because they are fighting the exact same battle against the exact same corporate behemoth to protect the exact same local dirt and water.
It is a remarkable moment of unity. And to be clear, both Brockovich and Korick in the source material maintain a strict neutrality on the political parties themselves. They point out this bipartisan alliance simply to highlight that protecting basic human resources like drinking water, breathable air, a quiet home is a fundamental human issue that completely supersedes partisan ideology.
But I have to ask the hard question here regarding the geopolitics.
Let's hear it.
If the federal government and the tech industry truly view this AI arms race against China like a modern Manhattan Project, a national security imperative of the highest order history shows us that the federal government will absolutely bulldoze local concerns for what they perceive as the greater good.
Yes, historically that is true.
We saw it with the interstate highway system. We saw it with nuclear testing. Are these grassroots movements, these local town hall victories, and temporary state bans just a speed bump? Are they just a temporary delay before a federally backed, multi-trillion-dollar tech oligarchy simply changes the law and gets its way?
That is the defining tension of this entire crisis, and honestly, we don't have the answer yet. Local zoning laws and municipal pushback are incredibly powerful tools for delay, as we've seen with the fired city councils in Utah and Missouri.
But delay isn't a permanent victory.
No, it isn't. If the tech lobbying wing successfully pushes federal legislation that officially categorizes AI data centers as quote-unquote critical national security infrastructure, the federal government could invoke preemption.
Meaning what?
meaning they could legally override local zoning authority entirely.
So the city council's opinion wouldn't even matter anymore.
Exactly. That is precisely why the grassroots movement is focusing so heavily on immediate radical transparency and pushing for federal pauses, like the Sanders AOC bill. It is a desperate race against the clock.
They're trying to lock in the rules.
Yes. The citizens are trying to establish a firm regulatory framework, one that mandates water protection and grid subsidies, before the tech industry can cement the narrative of unchecked emergency national necessity.
Wow. As we look at this incredible clash, the power of everyday people in small towns standing up to the unchecked power of global tech giants, it brings us to our final takeaways for you, the listener. We've covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started with the stealthy, almost covert nature of these projects, how corporate non-disclosure agreements are weaponized against local city councils to hide the arrival of heavy machinery until it's simply too late.
And we broke down the staggering environmental toll, the sheer thermodynamics of liquid cooling that results in the extraction of up to 7 million gallons of water a day per facility.
Right, draining rural aquifers in drought-stricken regions and introducing severe risks of bacterial collapse in municipal water supplies due to chemical contamination.
We looked at the hidden economic shockwaves, too. An antiquated 150-year-old electrical grid being pushed to the breaking point, resulting in capacity auctions that quietly pass billions of dollars in infrastructure upgrade costs directly onto everyday consumers.
Forcing fixed-income households to subsidize the power lines for tech billionaires.
Exactly. And we explored the immediate physical degradation of life for the neighbors, the relentless 247 low-frequency noise pollution that actively disrupts the human vestibular system.
The unexplained physiological stress symptoms, the plummeting local wildlife populations, and the extreme fire hazards posed by massive heat generation in dry rural brush.
Yet, despite this overwhelming convergence of corporate power and geopolitical panic, we also saw a highly encouraging, incredibly rare phenomenon. A completely bipartisan grassroots movement.
Americans uniting across deeply entrenched ideological lines to demand transparency, accountability, and the basic right to protect their own backyards.
And perhaps the most empowering message from Erin Brockovich in all of this is that you do not need to be a PhD environmental scientist, a constitutional lawyer, or a medical doctor to observe your own environment and demand answers.
Right. She references her famous early work in Hinckley, California. The metaphor she uses is just brilliant. The two-headed frog.
Yeah. If you look at the creek in your community and you see a two-headed frog, you don't need a doctorate in biology to know that something is fundamentally toxically wrong with the water.
Your basic humanity and your daily lived observation of your own surroundings fully qualify you to stand up at a city council meeting, point at the heavy machinery, and ask, what are you building, and what is it going to do to our water? You have the absolute right to challenge the secrecy.
You don't need the corporate data to trust what you are seeing with your own eyes.
We've spent this entire deep dive talking about the secretive construction, the mind-boggling resource drain, and the daily operation of these 4,000-acre megacenters. But I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over. Something that builds on the thermodynamics and the hardware we discussed today.
The rapid pace of the technology itself.
Exactly. Technology evolves at absolute lightning speed. The servers that were considered cutting edge just 5 years ago are ancient, obsolete history today.
Right.
The specialized GPUs running Comm K3 today will be useless garbage in a decade. So what happens in 10 or 15 years when the highly specific, incredibly massive hardware inside these 4,000-acre behemoths is no longer fast enough?
The tech companies will simply move on to the next generation of infrastructure.
Leaving behind what? Are we quietly allowing corporations to build the largest generation of toxic, abandoned e-waste monuments in human history? Millions of tons of specialized plastics, heavy metals, and cooling chemicals, sitting completely unregulated right on top of our most vital agricultural aquifers. Think about the long-term reality of that the next time you see a vague, unremarkable sign for a warehouse going up on the quiet edge of your town.